I'm going to introduce our speaker. Christa holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and a Master's degree in Heritage Preservation with an emphasis in Public History from Georgia State University. She oversees the legal documentation, storage maintenance, artifact preservation, and data entry for the museum's collection of over 60,000 artifacts. She is the Georgia State representative for the Southeastern Registrars Association. Christa has presented at state, regional, and national conferences about her work with the collection. Welcome, Christa.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I'm very excited to be here. It's been probably a decade since I've been here, so I'm very, very excited to be back. So yes, this is my institution is called the Marietta History Center. If you grab a business card or one of my rack cards, it will still say Marietta Museum of History. That was our name for the first 25 years. So we rebranded. We're now the Marietta History Center to showcase more of what we're doing outside of our building. And this is our website and our social medias. This is our building. It is called the Kennesaw House. It was built in around 1845 as a cotton warehouse and then became a hotel in 1855. Originally, it was 4 stories. It's 3 stories now. And this is where we have like all of our events. The museum gallery space is the 2nd floor. And the 3rd floor is where I work. And that's where all the fun stuff is and the storage and the collection. So in a staff of 5, everybody else has to share, but I get my own floor. So I'm very, very proud of that I get my own space. But we do have a museum store. And then we also have, you see right out front, railroad tracks. And yes, they come by every day. Don't know when, but they're always there. We always hear those tracks. And we're right 1 block west of the Marietta Square. So if you've ever been to Marietta and the square, 1 block west, we face the railroad tracks. So I do have a couple of upcoming events. I'm going to start with this one right here that says Pop In for Family Fun. It's actually tomorrow, and it is for the rest of this year. It is a free family event from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. with crafts and activities for families to do. Tomorrow's theme is, because it's October, ghosts and ghouls. But in November, the theme is the big chicken. So we will be talking about the big chicken, and we'll have our stuffed chickens out for people. We've turned our big chicken into a puzzle as well. We just got those in as a puzzle with the big chicken. And then some of you heard us discussing earlier cemeteries. I work for the Marietta History Center, but I'm actually an employee of the city of Marietta, which has allowed me to become the historian for the Marietta City Cemetery, which is the home to approximately 4,500, as I call them, constant residents in the cemetery. And I do walking tours out there, which always have a different theme. So next Saturday, the theme is Upon Further Investigation, which is stories I've told before, but more information and research has come out that I'm going to then share to the public. And then the last one in November 12th, are people that are also connected to books. So I'll have a whole backpack full of books with me, and we'll go from stop to stop, and I'll bring out the book that the person or persons are mentioned in. And then the 2 in the middle are tombstone cleaning workshops. That has become my very favorite hobby. It's very soothing. It's very peaceful. But I teach people how to clean a tombstone properly. I'm at the process right now where I'm working on how to fix them if they've broken or if they've fallen, but I'm not ready to teach those yet. But tombstone cleaning workshops have become our new event. And I actually do have permission to clean in another cemetery in the neighborhood right next to my house. So it's very easy for me to go out there and clean them. And the reason we do it is because there's so much information that can be lost, hidden behind lichen and moss. So, and actually the first people who ever told me about tombstone cleaning are in this room. The Bramletts, I vividly, you did one, I want to say the Lacey's, was that right? So that started my interest, and then it took me a few years before I could actually do it myself. But all of our events and programs are on our website, which is mariettahistory.org. But the reason I'm here is to talk about this woman. This is Regina Rambo Benson. And I've actually worked at the museum for 18 years. And the first exhibit we ever did was entitled Remarkable Women of Marietta and Cobb County. Now, there is a book called Remarkable Women of Georgia. We took that idea of that book and we brought it down to the local level. And this image I would walk past every single day, and all we had was a really small bio, maybe 5 sentences at the most. And I had said to my curator who was working on the exhibit at the time, I said, well, what do you know about Regina? I'd like to know more. And she goes, well, this is really all I have. You know, we've got 25, 30 women I'm highlighting. I'm just trying to get, you know, the basics. And so I decided, this was around 2004, 2005. I decided, well, I wanted to learn more, and I did. And then in 2010, I did my first presentation on Regina, and have been continuing to do it since. And every single time, I've learned something new. You can never fully know somebody's life, but if I'm trying to, you know, get all the dates and see how much I can gather about her. But this picture was what started me. I like royal history too, so her dressed as a queen was really gathering my attention. So let me start a little bit with her background and her family. She was born Regina Elizabeth Rambo. She was actually born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Her father was working as a dentist there, one of the first dentists in that country. She and her older brother, Marcellus, were the two that were born there. The family's background does go back to Georgia. So she was born there. The family moved back to Georgia once Marcellus and Regina were getting to be about school age. When they moved back to Georgia, they moved to Marietta. 2 more siblings followed, Emma, and then a brother, Samuel Jr., who actually died at a young age. So when they moved back to Georgia, they did have family connections in Clay County, which is near the Alabama border, and they did have connections with Middle Georgia in the Macon area as well. This is her childhood home. It still exists. Sometimes you hear, if you're in Marietta, people refer to it as Mockingbird Hill, but I've always referred to it as the Rambo House. And this picture, this image was actually loaned to me by Regina's granddaughter, Janice. It's a really big, stately home, very, very pretty, and it's still a private residence today. Regina, there's people, when you go and you research and you talk about them, that there's just such a wealth of information, it becomes overwhelming. As I said, I'm always finding more about her. She was a go-getter, is what I'm going to use. Some people would say she was not a go-getter. She was more of a nuisance because she was kind of progressive in her ambitions. So this is her around 1905. And interestingly enough, about this first image where she's got the grand hat on, I first saw this image on Find a Grave, which is a website for cemetery researchers. And I had emailed the person that put that picture up and said, oh, where did you find that picture? I'd like to, you know, I didn't know this person. And I said, I'd like to know more about it, where it came from. And the researcher said, oh, I have it. Do you want it? Yes, absolutely, I want it. And they actually also had the picture that I showed of her brother Marcellus. They were no relation to Regina. They had found it, and it was labeled at like an antique store. So they sent me that picture, and it's now in the History Center's collection. And then this picture right here of her at her in college at Wesleyan, which I'll talk about in just a second, was from her granddaughter. So her early life in Marietta, she did go to what were it's not a public school system at the time, but were schools that were available for whites only in Marietta. So she did receive education in Marietta, but then went to Wesleyan College in Macon, where she focused on the arts such as dancing, singing, and acting. And the prophecy for her after her graduation was that she would be painting signs all over the world. That did not happen, but she sure did make an impression. The quote when she graduated, which I love this quote so much, it's right at the bottom, it's hard to read. It says, "The night shows stars and women in a better light." And she graduated with 3 degrees, a Bachelor of Arts, a Bachelor's of Art, there were 2 different things, and a Bachelor's in Dramatics, which in 1967, Wesleyan College actually provided her an award for distinguished achievement. So she was definitely remembered at that school. So as I said, she got her degrees in art, and here are some more pictures of her. Some are from the family. You can see she definitely had the theatrical side. So there were a few quotes about her that I thought was interesting. Somebody had said that she was endowed with all the gifts imaginable. She sings as naturally as a bird, opera in French and German, and knows Southern folk songs. She plays the piano, the violin, and paints watercolors, oils, and on china. She excels in dramatics, taking leading roles in plays and musical comedies. She is a daring equestrian, taming wild horses being her favorite sport as a young girl. She plays golf, tennis, she swims, and dives like a seagull. So people had very fond memories of her and talking about her. And one other story that I thought was very interesting was she knew that to be somebody who loved arts, that you needed to go to Europe and see those classical paintings and artwork, but she didn't have the money to do it. Her father was a dentist, but he's working based off of pay that his patients could give him, which could be a chicken or strawberries, which I'll talk about strawberries in a minute. It's a very important story. She had the entrepreneurial spirit to know, if I'm going to go to Europe, I'm going to need to find the money myself. And when I showed you my building, the railroad tracks are right in front. And one day the train was carrying loads of coal and it derailed right outside of the Marietta city limits. And they couldn't put the coal back in the train and sell it because it was deemed damaged goods. So she asked a railroad official if she could take some of the coal and sell it herself, which she did. She paid $50 to hire some help to have her help her load up the coal. And she ended up selling the coal around town and raised almost $800 for her trip to Europe. So very much an entrepreneur, knowing what she wants. Now, with Regina, the biggest story that really ties her to Georgia on a local scale is the Georgia Good Roads Tour in 1910. So obviously today, we all getting here, there are paved roads, still traffic, but there were paved roads. Unlike these roads here where they're muddy and they're rutted and it was very, very hard to get around. Her older brother, Marcellus, had actually competed in a road tour from Alabama to New York, and she participated with him for a portion of that. And that kind of got her excitement going in this bug of driving around promoting the idea of paved roads and better roads across Georgia. So on October 14th, which is today, 1910, 110 years ago, the Atlanta papers announced Regina's involvement in the Good Roads Tour. She was quoted as saying, "With joy and pleasure, I announce the fact that I will drive my car on your splendid tour." So this was a tour that the newspapers were setting up. She goes, "It is broken now," meaning her car. The tour is about to start in just a couple of days. "But in case the parts do not arrive on time, I have another Columbia tendered by me from the Maxwell Briscoe Company. My mother and Mrs. Joseph Brown, the then wife of the governor of the then wife, Joseph M. Brown, and Mrs. Wilder Glover will accompany me. As I understand my car and can fix a puncture with as much ease as I play the piano, mere man will be eliminated from my car, though they are at times very present in times of trouble and help. Okay. And as I said, I anticipate a splendid trip, for I drove to Thomasville only last week without mishap. Wishing the tour all the success in the world, I am, Regina. So if you don't know where Thomasville is, that's very South Georgia, close to the state line with Florida. So for us, it's about a 4-hour drive from Thomasville to Atlanta. So she said she'd just done it the week prior, and now she's going to set off on this 1,000-mile tour around Georgia, taking her mother, Mrs. Joseph M. Brown, and Mrs. Wilder Glover. So 4 women in a car. It was the only car that had only female participants. There was another car with a female driver, but she had men in the car with her. Now, the stipulation was, when she wanted to do this tour, Dr. Rambo, her father, clearly said, if you're going to do this, you need to know how to fix your car. So that's how she figured out how to change tires. She knew the engine thoroughly. She knew what to do, which I am completely impressed by, because I certainly don't know how to do that. I think I know how to, but I know I don't know how to. So this is her with her vehicle, giving kind of a, those press photo ops. So on October 14th is when she announced. October 17th, another article said, one of the fair daughters of Marietta, Miss Regina Rambo, was the first woman in Georgia to join the crusade for good roads. She started upon a tour of the state, driving her own car, a Columbia. She appeared upon the scene to begin the long journey around the state, and she was greeted with enthusiastic applause. It was a novel sight, but the record made by Miss Rambo was even more unique. She completed the trip of 1,000 miles without an accident and finished with a perfect score, having made the circuit of the state in less than 10 days and having remained continuously at the wheel. So the article started the first one I said was October 17th. The tour actually ends around October 26th, October 27th. I will say she did get a perfect score, and I'm very, very proud of her on that, but she did receive a ticket for speeding over the 12-mile-per-hour speed limit. So here's some more pictures of her. Here she is coming out of the vehicle, and here she is with some other of the drivers and participants. So the drivers, there were 74 cars that participated. The drivers made their way from Atlanta to Macon to Albany, Waycross, Augusta, Savannah. They kind of made this loop, which ended up being 1,000 miles. At one point, they ended up hitting the tail end of a hurricane. So they got into the wind and the fallen trees. And I mean, look at the car. Let me go back. Look at that car in a hurricane. I don't know if even the tail end of one, I don't know if I'd want to be in that vehicle. Now, every place that she went, every stop she made, she would find a merchant or a home that had a telephone, so she could call Marietta to a local business, and the local business then would share the information with Dr. Rambo to let him know that everybody was doing good, because his wife and his daughter are on this road trip and he's not there. So that's how the information was passed. And if you look at newspapers, the story gets picked up across the country about her driving and her not having a man in the car. It's just this group of women, because that was truly a novel sight, to have a group of women driving through these muddy, ruddy roads in Georgia or anywhere in the United States. Mm-hmm. Oh, like her mother or Mrs. Brown or Mrs. Wilder Glover. I don't think they were as familiar with a car like she was. I definitely think Mrs. Brown was in the car to kind of bolster the effect of the importance of the good roads. And since they all were local, because the Brown family is from Marietta, or not from Marietta, were living in, had a home there at the time, it made really a good PR move to have the governor's wife in the car with her. But that would be amazing to know if Mrs. Brown knew how to change tire and do all the engine work too. So here's another kind of promo shot later of Regina in her vehicle. Definitely, that one's one of my favorites as well. But this picture is from 1910, but in 1909, she had actually published in the one of the motoring magazines, Motoring Advice for Women. Okay, so I'm going to kind of read you this list. So she says that it's very important for women who are going to drive cars that when crossing before a railroad train, which in Marietta you see a lot, be sure that you have plenty of time, because it is understood that many railroad officials object to having their locomotive scratched up. She goes, it's point number 2. It's all right to chase a dog through his own yard, but it's not considered worthwhile to pursue a chicken so far. If you meet a large bull head on, you will have to exercise caution in hitting him to avoid a puncture. Very important. You don't want a puncture in your tire. I'm going to skip number 4 because it's kind of my favorite one. It goes, number 5, it's only permissible to run into another auto when you are driving the heavier car. And when a constable stretches a rope across the road, put on full speed and run into the constable. Number 4 was to save your car from injury, never hesitate to risk a limb of some other person. And then lastly, she says it's important. She goes, seriously, let me sum up to my women readers the most important points. Learn to drive with caution and skill, learn your engine thoroughly, and learn to shoot. So at the end of the tour, she didn't win, but what the Atlanta Constitution ended up doing was providing her and presenting her a loving cup. So that is what the loving cup looks like. I actually have seen the loving cup. I have held it. It is in the possession of the family. So the loving cup says, presented to Miss Regina Rambo by the Atlanta Constitution, the first woman to drive an automobile 1,000 miles around Georgia, October 26, 1910. And she would continue actually to participate in road tours. After this, in 1911, she did another one where she did over 100 miles of road tour through really tough terrain in North Georgia. What's interesting is the way she participated today. She was trying to get good roads, but today we would kind of call that a rally circuit or a different kind of driving where they participate and they get trophies to do that. And then in 1913, a gentleman named Lucian L. Knight, who wrote a book called Georgia Landmarks, Memorials, and Legends, discussed her and said, Miss Rambo has accomplished something vastly more than the mere feat of making a record. She has incidentally marked an epoch by creating this whole idea of women driving and doing all this to promote good roads. So she really, really had an impact, but that impact doesn't stop. Just because the Good Roads Tour and the roads are starting to get better and better, it doesn't mean that she wasn't advocating for it. She also was big into advocating for organizations and groups. So she had a lot of volunteerism, especially around Marietta and Cobb County, but she was involved on a regional level in a lot of organizations. It almost makes me tired when I have to read this, but she participated, or she was past president for numerous groups, including PTA, YWCA, UDC, DAR, the Georgia Democratic Club, the Altar Guild, the Marietta Theater Guild, the Community Players, the Creative Study Club, the Flower Garden Club. And she was also choir director for the First Methodist Church and another church in Marietta, St. Stephen's Methodist Church. Just listing all of those, I'm tired just thinking about all the clubs and organizations that she had a hand in. And this is all occurring after the Good Roads Tour, before her marriage, after her marriage, and while she's raising children, which I'll talk about in just a minute. She did have a very active role in the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and that's where this picture comes from. And she did a lot of things to help preserve Kennesaw Mountain later. Just her in the 1920s when they had the reunions and things, she was always out there for those. And Andrew, have you ever seen the little bullet, the card with the bullet on it from Kennesaw Mountain? She was a part of that program to do some of that. Now I'm going back to this picture because this picture actually does have a meaning, and it was the Queen of the Harvest Festival. This is 1915. So this was a state festival, the Harvest Festival. And so in 1915, you kind of have this election of who's going to be the Queen of the Harvest Festival. You gather names of women across the state, and you put it out there for the state, for people to vote for, and it's through the newspaper again. So many felt Regina was a good representation for the local area. And one letter to the Atlanta Constitution said, "I would like to add that this young lady has her own distinguished personality, every requisite for becoming a Queen of Georgia, whether it's baking a cake or putting an automobile together, whether making a dress or a speech, whether taking a high dive in the water or a jump on a horse, whether befriending someone who is down and out or adorning any station, or taking charge of veterans reunions. There is nothing local about Miss Regina. She is the ornament of the whole state." O.B. Keeler, who was noted as an Atlanta newspaper man, but also a native Mariettan, listed everything Regina could do. She could swim, dive, drive motor cars. She knew electrics. She could ride anything equine. She could shoot military rifles and trap guns. She could draw pictures, make a picture, use a camera, dance, solo interpretations. She could sing, make speeches, play tennis, golf, basketball, football, piano, guitar, speak French, Portuguese, English, all of these things. This part I thought was interesting. She could run 50 yards in 6.25 seconds. She could run 100 yards in 12 seconds. She surely could run for queen. She garnered over 137,000 votes across the state. Second place had 84,000 votes. And then when she got the title, she also received a $1,000 electric coupe vehicle that she could drive. So she was able to kind of bring about a whole gathering of the state by voting for her to be the Queen of the Harvest Festival. So that's where that picture comes from. Now, I haven't mentioned her husband because this isn't all about Dr. Benson, but here is Dr. Benson right there. Let me tell you the story about the two of them. I mentioned strawberries earlier, and that's because it goes back to the story of the two of them. So she did have a number of suitors. Like I said, she was born 1887. They get married in 1917, so do the math. She wasn't, at that time, she would have been deemed a spinster or on the shelf, but she was living her life, which I appreciate greatly. So she was well known throughout the South, and this is a story that kind of comes through the family. I don't know if it's true. I don't really care if it's true because it's just a cute story. So her father, the dentist, had an office next to Dr. Warren Benson, who was a physician. And one day, Dr. Benson comes next door to Dr. Rambo's office and says, "See what one of my patients has brought me?" And it was a box of strawberries, fresh strawberries from their garden. "Wouldn't you like to have some?" And Dr. Rambo responds, "What, may I ask, would you like to borrow this time?" So he thought, uh-oh, he's offering strawberries. He's going to want to borrow something. He goes, "Nothing." Warren says, "Nothing, doctor, nothing at all. I have come this time to ask you to give me something." Dr. Rambo, "Name it, young man, and it's all yours." Warren, "Your daughter, sir." Dr. Rambo stopped eating the strawberries and jumped from his chair and began to pace the office floor. "Which one?" "I have two, and I didn't know you were interested in either." "Regina, sir, is the one I want to marry." Dr. Rambo looked from the blushing face of the ardent lover, as the story goes, to the nearly empty box of strawberries and said, "Sold for a mess of strawberries, if she'll have you." And so Dr. Rambo was confident, or Dr. Benson, excuse me, was confident of winning Regina. And the young couple were engaged, and they married at the First Methodist Church, December 14th, 1917, which was Dr. Benson's 30th birthday and also Regina's mother's birthday. That is her in her wedding dress, and that is him in military uniform. I'm sure if you see him in that uniform, you're probably going to guess where we're going to go. That's to talk about him first. So this is his family. The Benson family does have a long history in Marietta, going back to families named Latimer, and going back to families that founded Marietta and Cobb County. And so this is him in his flight gear during the war. He actually volunteered and then was commissioned as a first lieutenant in the Army Medical Corps from 1917 to 1919. He also was really important in the founding and the start of Kennestone Hospital. Now it's Wellstar Kennestone. Very, very important. Yep. This is her husband. It's funny because I always refer to her as Regina Rambo Benson every time. So Dr. Rambo's her dad. Dr. Benson is her husband. So this is Dr. Benson's family, and that's Dr. Benson. So let's call him Warren. Let's take the doctor part out for the moment. So that is Warren's family, and they have longer, their ties in Marietta and Cobb County go farther back than Regina's family does. So this is actually Regina sitting in the barracks, playing the banjo. She went and lived with Warren in the barracks, which was unusual at the time, but I'm not surprised she did that during the war. She was going to do what she wanted. And then this is the home that the Warren and Regina bought and lived in. The home still exists. It doesn't exist in the location, but that picture is taken. It was moved along with a number of other houses. Instead of demoing them to make room for widened roads, they moved the home to a place that is now called Victorian Village in Marietta, and it's a number of historic homes that were turned into apartments. And what they actually did with the Regina and Warren's home is they raised it up a level so it looks like it's 3 stories when actually it was just 2. They raised it up so they could have more apartment spaces. And the home was moved, I want to say, in the early 1970s. So Regina and her husband had 4 children, one who died in infancy, very similar to the story of her parents. So the 2 pictures you're seeing are their 2 oldest children, Marcellus and Regina. I love it when people name their children the same names as them. It becomes very difficult. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not Marcellus. That's Warren Jr. You have Regina, Warren Jr., and Marcellus. But what was very interesting, and I had heard this story somewhere before, I talked about how Regina was very into the arts and to dancing and everything. Well, when she was pregnant with the first child, Regina, she was actually teaching dance fully pregnant, which in the 1920s would have been very scandalous. And people talked about that around town, how Regina was teaching dance with child. So it was a very, very scandalous thing, but it doesn't surprise me that she would do it. So the children were born between 1920 and 1925. And the couple were married in 1917, but in 1928, Dr. Benson actually was going on a house call. And when he was leaving the house call, he slipped and fell on icy stairs and hit his head. And when he hit his head, it ended up causing an infection, and it actually led to meningitis, which was what killed him 10 days later. Regina was left to raise the children, which she did in the home that I just showed you. But she also had to deal with a lot of his debts because as a doctor in 1928, he wasn't always taking cash payments or anything like that for insurance. So he was taking whatever a patient could offer, and just like the strawberries I told you earlier. So she ended up having to pay a lot of the debts that he had incurred, and she was able to do it. She became, again, that entrepreneurial spirit, and I'll talk a little bit about what she had done. But one of the things she ended up doing, which kind of is interesting. She created a patent medicine company in her own home where she would concoct medicines that weren't always successful, is what the grandchildren told me. But I thought that was kind of interesting. For somebody that was married to a doctor, you're going to want to try and cure people with things that you've created in your basement. But yes, so that is their family. So they were married for just 10 years. It was a very short period of time. But Regina knew that she had other accomplishments and things that she wanted to do, and that didn't hold her back. She did not remarry. She didn't remarry. But what she ended up doing in 1932, for example, was run for Congress. And as I said, she was doing patent medicine. Well, a lot of patent medicines required alcohol. And during that time period, alcohol was not the easiest thing to come by because we were in Prohibition. So she ran on a anti-prohibition platform. And what she ended up doing was realizing that in order to get what she wanted, she's going to run on this platform. And she goes, I only have one plank in my platform. It will call for the submission of the 18th Amendment or to remove the 18th Amendment for the people. And I'm in favor of a change in the prohibition law and believe the people will vote for change. At least the votes are entitled to express their views, and sometimes they have never had an opportunity to do so. She went to the Democratic Committee to get her name on the ballot for the primary, but found out that she needed to pay $1,500 to do so, which in today's money is about $28,000. In order to get, granted, that seems like a pittance compared to what the amount of money they put into campaigns today, but she was able to, what she ended up doing was not put her name on the primary ballot, but have her name listed as an independent Democrat for the final election ticket. So sort of a write-in vote. She received almost 4,300 votes. She didn't win. She didn't get a spot in Congress, but what she was able to do is knock the fee down from $1,500 to $150 to get your name on the primary. Still a decent amount of money, but knock off 1 0, it's a lot better. That was the last time. She didn't run for political office after that. She's like, well, I accomplished something, so I'm going to move on. But she did, as I said, continue with her medicine manufacturing, and then later she opened the Credit Bureau of Marietta. So here are a few more pictures of her around town. The first one is her in her vehicle for the 100th anniversary of Marietta, so our centennial celebration, and Marietta and Cobb County. So she did that. She drove around. She had her banner. I'm going to skip the middle photo for just a second because I have a very interesting story about that. The one at the top, 1948, was the last streetcar run from Marietta to Atlanta. When she heard about that, she decided she was going to throw a party on the streetcar. So they did a party, and she is that one right there, that lady. So they had a party for the outgoing streetcar, last ride of the streetcar. Now the middle picture is her at what is now Marietta Middle School. At the time, in 1942, it was Marietta High School, when they dedicated a sundial and a sundial court to Alice McClellan Burney, one of the co-founders of the PTA, who was born and raised in Marietta. And Regina is actually wearing a black dress, and as the story goes, that dress was worn by Mrs. Burney when she went to the White House in 1897 to meet the First Lady and talk about at the time the National Congress of Mothers, the PTA. Well, yesterday I actually had the pleasure of seeing that dress in person. It still exists, and it is about to come to my location in the next, probably not by the, if not by the end of the month, in November. So that dress still exists from 1897, worn by Alice McClellan Burney and then Regina Rambo Benson. And it's not surprising that Regina was involved in the memorial to Alice and getting it. Not only was she heavily involved in the PTA with her children, but she was actually a teacher in Eastman, Georgia in 1914 for a very short period of time. I don't have any pictures of it, a very short period of time. So she was heavily involved in education for children. And if you're not familiar with the PTA and Alice McClone Burney, that is a whole other presentation unto itself. But that dress still exists, and I'm very excited that I got to see it yesterday. And it's actually in really good shape too. So here's a little bit more. These pictures came to me from the family. So Regina would have really, really appreciated this presentation, because Regina would go around and go to places like Egypt and what have you. And then when she would get back home, she would do a presentation for the family. So you have her with her friends, and any place they went, they would do these presentations. And then what was very, very interesting is the family would share, when I met them, share with me personal stories, things you couldn't find in the newspaper. One of the personal stories that I thought was really cute was that when Regina would go out of town, whether it be to Florida to visit her brother, Egypt, wherever, her neighbor, and she would do the same for the neighbor, they would watch their favorite soap opera, which was Young and the Restless, write very specific notes so that when the person came back, they could read the notes and catch up and know exactly what was going to happen in the next episode that they saw of The Young and the Restless, which I thought was just hilarious. But the family was kind enough to share those photos with me. And then this last one, I love this quote, that a girl can do anything she wants to, and the men and women who know how to do the greatest number of things are the ones who lead the happiest of lives. She certainly knew that to be involved was what was going to make her happy. Not only was she volunteering, during World War II, she helped set up a canteen for the soldiers who were, and servicemen who were around Marietta and Cobb County. She was active throughout her entire life. And then towards the last part of her life, she ended up being heavily involved at Kennestone Hospital in what they called their Gray Ladies, which was their volunteer corps, which I think kind of helped her tie back to her father and her husband, who were both doctors. When she died, she actually died in August, just before her birthday in I want to make sure I get this date right. Hold on one second. I want to say 1967, but watch, I'm probably going to say the wrong date. I was close, 1969. At the age of 82. In the last 8 years of her life, she was actually battling leukemia, but nobody knew it, only the immediate family. And she is buried in the Marietta City Cemetery next to her husband and the child that died in infancy. Her parents are buried somewhere else in that cemetery. She's really far away for when I do tours, so I never get to do a tour with her on it, because that's why she gets her own presentation. So I wanted to, even though they're not in the audience, I always thank the family, because without them, I wouldn't have known where the Loving Cup was, or the story about the Young and the Restless, or how she would like to go and lead Marietta High School before football games into rousing cheers at a pep rally. So I always think that her grandchildren. And what I would like to now do is open it up to any questions you may have about the lovely Regina. Go ahead. Yep. Does anybody know where the car is? I bet you anything they ran it into the ground and that was it. That's what I would do. That's what we still do. I haven't asked them again. What I hope is that eventually the Loving Cup will come to the History Center, but I haven't asked in a little while. I kind of stopped for a little bit. But the other thing I wish I knew, somebody had written kind of a biography of her life, but I don't have all of it. And they reference a lot of family letters, and that's some of the letters her father, Dr. Rambo, wouldn't say dearest Regina, he would just say Sunshine. He would call her Sunshine. I wish I knew where those letters were. Yes, ma'am. So the daughter Regina, who actually donated some of her mother's items to us, I never had the pleasure of meeting her. She was definitely heavily involved in a lot of the same organizations that her mother was, but I don't think they were as much of pioneers or progressive in being at the forefront of new things. But they were definitely heavily involved. The youngest son, Marcellus, actually passed away, I want to say, it was after I had started doing these presentations, so maybe 5 or 7 years ago. But yeah, they were just mainly involved locally, not necessarily on a state, regional level like their mother had been. Yeah, they're very, very nice. The grandchildren, like I said, I did not meet Regina's. Oh, yes. Yes, very, very lovely family. Everybody's, when I was doing this, the first time, they all came, they sat in the audience, and at that one, I actually dressed up like her with the jacket and the coat and everything. And so they were very tickled. They took me out to lunch afterwards and told me how much she would have liked a good presentation like that. She probably would have interrupted me though and said, "No, that's not right." But that would have been amazing.
So we get the cheap presentation. No.
Well, you know what ended up happening? My costumes got taken, so I don't have the whole costume anymore. So it looks weird if I just show up in a trench coat without the hat and the skirt. I don't have the full ensemble anymore. It would have looked a little weird, but yeah, no, you don't get the full ensemble. That's, like I said, I don't dress up in costume like I used to anymore. Couple of kids later, they don't fit the same way. Are there any other questions? I kind of go over a lot, but I thank you guys for listening and enjoying it. Here is my contact info. I do have business cards up front if you'd like